This pattern of data suppression has a long history. In 1880, J. D. Whitney, the state geologist of California, published a lengthy review of advanced stone tools found in California gold mines. The implements, including spear-point sandstone mortars and pestles, were found deep in mine shafts, underneath thick, undisturbed layers of lava, in formations that geologists now say are from 9 million to over 55 million years old. W. H. Holmes of the Smithsonian Institution, one of the most vocal 19th-century critics of the California finds, wrote, "Perhaps if Professor Whitney had fully appreciated the story of human evolution as it is understood today, he would have hesitated to announce the conclusions formulated, that humans existed in very ancient times in North America, notwithstanding the imposing array of testimony with which he was confronted." In other words, if the facts do not agree with the favored theory, then such facts, even an imposing array of them, must be discarded. In Chapter 6, we review discoveries of anomalously old skeletal remains of the anatomically modern human type. Perhaps the most interesting case is that of Casanetolo, Italy, where in the 1880s, G. Ragazzoni, a geologist, found fossil bones of several Homo sapiens sapiens individuals in layers of Pliocene sediment 3 to 4 million years old. Critics typically respond that the bones must have been placed into these Pliocene layers fairly recently by human burial. But Ragazzoni was alert to this possibility and carefully inspected the overlying layers. He found them undisturbed, with absolutely no sign of burial. Modern scientists have used radiometric and chemical tests to attach recent ages to the Casanetolo bones and other anomalously old human skeletal remains. But, as we show in Appendix 1, these tests can be quite unreliable. The carbon-14 test is especially unreliable when applied to bones, such as the Casanetolo bones, that have lain in museums for decades. Under these circumstances, bones are exposed to contamination that could cause the carbon-14 test to yield abnormally young dates. Rigorous purification techniques are required to remove such contamination. Scientists did not employ these techniques in the 1969 carbon-14 testing of some of the Casanetolo bones, which yielded an age of less than 1,000 years. Although the carbon-14 date for the Casanetolo material is suspect, it must still be considered as relevant evidence. But it should be weighed along with the other evidence, including the original stratigraphic observations of Ragazzoni, a professional geologist. In this case, the stratigraphic evidence appears to be more conclusive. Opposition, on theoretical grounds, to a human presence in the Pliocene is not a new phenomenon. Speaking of the Casanetolo finds and others of similar antiquity, the Italian scientist G. Sergi wrote in 1884, "By means of a despotic scientific prejudice, call it what you will, every discovery of human remains in the Pliocene has been discredited." A good example of such prejudice is provided by R. A. S. McAllister, who in 1921 wrote about the Casanetolo finds in a textbook on archaeology, "There must be something wrong somewhere." Noting that the Casanetolo bones were anatomically modern, McAllister concluded, if they really belonged to the stratum in which they were found, this would imply an extraordinarily long standstill for evolution. It is much more likely that there is something amiss with the observations. He further stated, the acceptance of a Pliocene date for the Casanetolo skeletons would create so many insoluble problems that we can hardly hesitate in choosing between the alternatives of adopting or rejecting their authenticity. This supports the primary point we are trying to make in forbidden archaeology, namely, that there exists in the scientific community a knowledge filter that screens out unwelcome evidence. This process of knowledge filtration has been going on for well over a century and continues right up to the present day. Our discussion of anomalously old human skeletal remains brings us to the end of Part 1, our catalogue of controversial evidence. In Part 2 of Forbidden Archaeology, we survey the body of accepted evidence that is generally used to support the now dominant ideas about human evolution. Chapter 7 focuses on the discovery of Pithecanthropus erectus by Eugene Du Bois in Java during the last decade of the 19th century. Historically, the Java man discovery marks a turning point. Until then, there was no clear picture of human evolution to be upheld and defended. Therefore, a good number of scientists, most of them evolutionists, were actively considering a substantial body of evidence, catalogued in Part 1, indicating that anatomically modern humans existed in the Pliocene and earlier. With the discovery of Java man, now classified as Homo erectus, the long-awaited missing link turned up in the Middle Pleistocene. As the Java man find won acceptance among evolutionists, the body of evidence for a human presence in more ancient times gradually slid into disrepute. This evidence was not conclusively invalidated. Instead, at a certain point, scientists stopped talking and writing about it. It was incompatible with the idea that ape-like Java man was a genuine human ancestor. As an example of how the Java man discovery was used to suppress evidence for a human presence in the Pliocene and earlier, the following statement made by W. H. Holmes about the California finds reported by J. D. Whitney is instructive. After asserting that Whitney's evidence stands absolutely alone, Holmes complained that it implies a human race older by at least one-half than Pithecanthropus erectus, which may be regarded as an incipient form of human creature only. Therefore, despite the good quality of Whitney's evidence, it had to be dismissed. Interestingly enough, modern researchers have reinterpreted the original Java Homo erectus fossils. The famous bones reported by Du Bois were a skullcap and femur. Although the two bones were found over 45 feet apart, in a deposit filled with bones of many other species, Du Bois said they belonged to the same individual. But in 1973, M. H. Day and T. I. Malson determined that the femur found by Du Bois is different from other Homo erectus femurs and is in fact indistinguishable from anatomically modern human femurs. This caused Day and Malson to propose that the femur was not connected with the Java man skull. As far as we can see, this means that we now have an anatomically modern human femur and a Homo erectus skull in a Middle Pleistocene stratum that is considered to be 800,000 years old. This provides further evidence that anatomically modern humans coexisted with more ape-like creatures in unexpectedly remote times. According to standard views, anatomically modern humans arose just 100,000 years ago in Africa. Of course, one can always propose that the anatomically modern human femur somehow got buried quite recently into the Middle Pleistocene beds at Tuttle. But the same could also be said of the skull. In Chapter 7, we also consider the many Java Homo erectus discoveries reported by G. H. R. von Koenigswald and other researchers. Almost all of these bones were surface finds, the true age of which is doubtful. Nevertheless, scientists have assigned them Middle and Early Pleistocene dates obtained by the potassium-argon method. The potassium-argon method is used to date layers of volcanic material, not bones. Because the Java Homo erectus fossils were found on the surface and not below the intact volcanic layers, it is misleading to assign them potassium-argon dates obtained from the volcanic layers. The infamous Piltdown hoax is the subject of Chapter 8. Early in this century, Charles Dawson, an amateur collector, found pieces of a human skull near Piltdown. Subsequently, scientists such as Sir Arthur Smith Woodward of the British Museum and Pierre Teilhard de Charton participated with Dawson in excavations that uncovered an ape-like jaw, along with several mammalian fossils of appropriate antiquity. Dawson and Woodward, believing the combination of human-like skull and ape-like jaw represented a human ancestor from the early Pleistocene or late Pliocene, announced their discovery to the scientific world. For the next 4 decades, Piltdown Man was accepted as a genuine discovery and was integrated into the human evolutionary lineage. In the 1950s, J. S. Weiner, K. P. Oakley, and other British scientists exposed Piltdown Man as an exceedingly clever hoax, carried out by someone with great scientific expertise. Some blamed Dawson or Teilhard de Chardin, but others have accused Sir Arthur Smith Woodward of the British Museum, Sir Arthur Keith of the Hunterian Museum of the Royal College of Surgeons, William Solis of the Geology Department at Cambridge, and Sir Grafton Elliot Smith, a famous anatomist. J. S. Weiner himself noted, "Behind it all we sense, therefore, a strong and impelling motive via broken bar. There could have been a mad desire to assist the doctrine of human evolution by furnishing the requisite missing link. A broken bar Piltdown might have offered irresistible attraction to some fanatical biologist." Piltdown is significant in that it shows that there are instances of deliberate fraud in paleoanthropology, in addition to the general process of knowledge filtration. Finally, there is substantial, though not incontrovertible, evidence that the Piltdown skull, at least, was a genuine fossil. The Piltdown gravels in which it was found are now thought to be 75,000 to 125,000 years old. An anatomically modern human skull of this age in England would be considered anomalous. Chapter 9 takes us to China, where in 1929 Davidson Black reported the discovery of Peking man fossils at Zhaoqian, formerly Chaoqian. Now classified as Homo erectus, the Peking man specimens were lost to science during the Second World War. Traditionally, Peking man has been depicted as a cave dweller who had mastered the arts of stone tool manufacturing, hunting, and building fires. But a certain number of influential researchers regarded this view as mistaken. They saw Peking man as the prey of a more advanced hominid, whose skeletal remains have not yet been discovered. In 1983, Wu Ryukang and Lin Shenglong published an article in Scientific American purporting to show an evolutionary increase in brain size during the 230,000 years of the Homo erectus occupation of the Zhaoqian cave. But we show that this proposal was based on a misleading statistical presentation of the cranial evidence. In addition to the famous Peking man discoveries, many more hominid finds have been made in China. These include, say, Chinese workers, australopithecines, various grades of Homo erectus, Neanderthaloids, early Homo sapiens, and anatomically modern Homo sapiens. The dating of these hominids is problematic. They occur at sites along with fossils of mammals broadly characteristic of the Pleistocene. In reading various reports, we noticed that scientists routinely used the morphology of the hominid remains to date these sites more precisely. For example, at Tongzhai, South China, Homo sapiens fossils were found along with the mammalian fossils. Kai Zhanlang said, the fauna suggests a middle-upper Pleistocene range, but the archaeological, that is, human, evidence is consistent with an upper Pleistocene age. Kai, using what we call morphological dating, therefore assigned the site, and hence the human fossils, to the upper Pleistocene. A more reasonable conclusion would be that the Homo sapiens fossils could be as old as the Middle Pleistocene. Indeed, our examination of the Tongzhai faunal evidence shows mammalian species that became extinct at the end of the Middle Pleistocene. This indicates that the Tongzhai site, and the Homo sapiens fossils, are at least 100,000 years old. Additional faunal evidence suggests a maximum age of about 600,000 years. the practice of morphological dating substantially distorts the hominid fossil record. In effect, scientists simply arrange the hominid fossils according to a favored evolutionary sequence, although the accompanying faunal evidence does not dictate this. If one considers the true probable date ranges for the Chinese hominids, one finds that various grades of Homo erectus and various grades of early Homo sapiens, including Neanderthaloids, may have coexisted with anatomically modern Homo sapiens in the Middle Pleistocene, during the time of the Zhao-Cadian Homo erectus occupation. In Chapter 10, we consider the possible coexistence of primitive hominids and anatomically modern humans not only in the distant past but in the present. Over the past century, scientists have accumulated evidence suggesting that human-like creatures resembling Gigantopithecus, Australopithecus, Homo erectus, and the Neanderthals are living in various wilderness areas of the world. In North America, these creatures are known as Sasquatch. In Central Asia, they are called Almas. In Africa, China, Southeast Asia, Central America, and South America, they are known by other names. Some researchers use the general term wildman to include them all. Scientists and physicians have reported seeing live wildmen, dead wildmen, and footprints. They have also catalogued thousands of reports from ordinary people who have seen wildmen, as well as similar reports from historical records. Meyer Shackley, a British anthropologist, wrote to us, "Opinions vary, but I guess the commonest would be that there is indeed sufficient evidence to suggest at least the possibility of the existence of various unclassified man-like creatures, but that in the present state of our knowledge it is impossible to comment on their significance in any more detail." The position is further complicated by misquotes, hoaxing, and lunatic fringe activities, but a surprising number of hardcore anthropologists seem to be of the opinion that the matter is very worthwhile investigating. Chapter 11 takes us to Africa. We describe in detail the cases mentioned in the first part of this introduction, Rex skeleton, the Laetoli footprints, etc. These provide evidence for anatomically modern humans in the early Pleistocene and late Pliocene. We also examine the status of Australopithecus. Most anthropologists say Australopithecus was a human ancestor with an ape-like head, a human-like body, and a human-like bipedal stance and gait. But other researchers make a convincing case for a radically different view of Australopithecus. Physical anthropologist C. E. Oxnard wrote in his book Uniqueness and Diversity in Human Evolution, 1975, pending further evidence we are left with the vision of intermediately sized animals, at home in the trees, capable of climbing, performing degrees of acrobatics, and perhaps of arm suspension. In a 1975 article in Nature, Oxnard found the australopithecines to be anatomically similar to orangutans and said it is rather unlikely that any of the australopithecines can have any direct phylogenetic link with the genus Homo. Oxnard's view is not new. Earlier in this century, when the first australopithecines were discovered, many anthropologists, such as Sir Arthur Keith, declined to characterize them as human ancestors. But they were later overruled. In his book The Order of Man, 1984, Oxnard noted, in the uproar, at the time, as to whether or not these creatures were near a poor human, the opinion that they were human won the day. This may well have resulted not only in the defeat of the contrary opinion but also the burying of that part of the evidence upon which the contrary opinion was based. If this is so, it should be possible to unearth this other part of the evidence. And that, in a more general way, is what we have done in forbidden archaeology. We have unearthed buried evidence, evidence which supports a view of human origins and antiquity quite different from that currently held. In Appendix 1, we review chemical and radiometric dating techniques and their application to human fossil remains, including some of those discussed in Chapter 6. In Appendix 2, we provide a limited selection of evidence for ancient humans displaying a level of culture beyond that indicated by the stone tools discussed in Chapters 3a-5. And in Appendix 3, we provide a table listing almost all of the discoveries contained in Forbidden Archaeology. Some might question why we would put together a book like Forbidden Archaeology, unless we had some underlying purpose. Indeed, there is some underlying purpose. Richard Thompson and I are members of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, a branch of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness that studies the relationship between modern science and the worldview expressed in the Vedic literature. This institute was founded by our spiritual master, His Divine Grace A. C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who encouraged us to critically examine the prevailing account of human origins and the methods by which it was established. From the Vedic literature, we derive the idea that the human race is of great antiquity. To conduct systematic research into the existing scientific literature on human antiquity, we express the Vedic idea in the form of a theory that various human-like and ape-like beings have coexisted for a long time. That our theoretical outlook is derived from the Vedic literature should not disqualify it. Theory selection can come from many sources: a private inspiration, previous theories, a suggestion from a friend, a movie, and so on. What really matters is not a theory's source but its ability to account for observations. Our research program led to results we did not anticipate, and hence a book much larger than originally envisioned. Because of this, we have not been able to develop in this volume our ideas about an alternative to current theories of human origins. We are therefore planning a second volume relating our extensive research results in this area to our Vedic source material. Given their underlying purpose, Forbidden Archaeology and its forthcoming companion volume may therefore be of interest to cultural and cognitive anthropologists, scholars of religion, and others concerned with the interactions of cultures in time and space. At this point, I would like to say something about my collaboration with Richard Thompson. Richard is a scientist by training, a mathematician who has published refereed articles and books in the fields of mathematical biology, remote sensing from satellites, geology, and physics. I am not a scientist by training. Since 1977, I have been a writer and editor for books and magazines published by the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. In 1984, Richard asked his assistant Stephen Burneth to begin collecting material on human origins and antiquity. In 1986, Richard asked me to take that material and organize it into a book. As I reviewed the material provided to me by Stephen, I was struck by the very small number of reports from 1859, when Darwin published The Origin of Species, until 1894, when Du Bois published his report on Java Man. Curious about this, I asked Stephen to obtain some anthropology books from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In these books, including an early edition of Bull's Fossil Men, I found highly negative reviews of numerous reports from the period in question. By tracing out footnotes, we dug up a few samples of these reports. Most of them, by 19th-century scientists, described incised bones, stone tools, and anatomically modern skeletal remains encountered in unexpectedly old geological contexts. The reports were of high quality, answering many possible objections. This encouraged me to make a more systematic search. Digging up this buried literary evidence required another 3 years. Stephen Burneth and I obtained rare conference volumes and journals from around the world, and together we translated the material into English. The results of this labor provided the basis for chapters 2a-6 in Forbidden Archaeology. After I reviewed the material Stephen gave me about the Peking Man discoveries, I decided we should also look at recent hominid finds in China. While going through dozens of technical books and papers, I noticed the phenomenon of morphological dating. And when I reviewed our African material, I encountered hints of the dissenting view regarding Australopithecus. My curiosity about these two areas also led to a fruitful extension of our original research program. Writing the manuscript from the assembled material took another couple of years. Throughout the entire period of research and writing, I had almost daily discussions with Richard about the significance of the material and how best to present it. Richard himself contributed most of Appendix 1, the discussion of the uranium series dating of the Huayotlico tools in Chapter 5, and the discussion of epistemological considerations in Chapter 1. The remainder of the book was written by me, although I relied heavily on research reports supplied by Stephen Burneth for Chapter 7 and the first part of Chapter 9, as well as Appendix 2. Stephen obtained much of the material in Appendix 2 from Ron Calais, who kindly sent us many Xeroxes of original reports from his archives. In this second printing of the first edition of Forbidden Archaeology, we have corrected several small errors in the original text, mostly typographical. The account of a Wildman sighting by Anthony B. Wooldridge, originally included in Chapter 10, has been deleted because we have since learned that the author has retracted his statements. Richard and I are grateful to our Bhaktivedanta Institute colleagues and the other reviewers who read all or part of the manuscript of Forbidden Archaeology. We have incorporated many, but not all, of their suggestions. Full responsibility for the content and manner of presentation lies with us. Virginia Steen McIntyre was kind enough to supply us with her correspondence on the dating of the Huayotlico, Mexico, site. We also had useful discussions about stone tools with Ruth D. Simpson of the San Bernardino County Museum and about shark teeth marks on bone with Thomas A. Dem A. Copyright R. A. Copyright of the San Diego Natural History Museum. I am indebted to my friend Pierce Julius Flynn for the continuing interest he has displayed in the writing and publication of Forbidden Archaeology. It is through him that I have learned much of what I know about current developments in the social sciences, particularly semiotics, the sociology of knowledge, and postmodern anthropology. This book could not have been completed without the varied services of Christopher Beadle, a computer science graduate of Brown University, who came to the Bhaktivedanta Institute in San Diego in 1988. He typeset almost all of the book, going through several revisions. He also made most of the tables, processed most of the illustrations, and served as a proofreader. He made many helpful suggestions on the text and illustrations, and he also helped arrange the printing. For overseeing the design and layout, Richard and I thank Robert Wintermute. The illustrations opposite the first page of the introduction and in Figure 11.11 are the much appreciated work of Miles Triplett. The cover painting is by Hans Olsen. David Smith, Sigalit Biniamni, Susan Fritz, Barbara Cantator, and Michael Best also helped in the production of this book. Richard and I would especially like to thank the international trustees of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, past and present, for their generous support for the research, writing, and publication of this book. Michael Crabtree also contributed toward the printing cost of this book. Finally, we encourage readers to bring to our attention any additional evidence that may be of interest, especially for inclusion in future editions of this book. We are also available for interviews and speaking engagements. Correspondence may be addressed to us at Bhaktivedanta Book Publishing, Incorporated, 3764 Watzke Avenue, Los Angeles, California 90034. Michael A. Cremo, Alachua, Florida, April 24, 1995. Page 36.